NJAC's People Rally will be held on Saturday, 21st April at the SWWTU Hall. It is expected to be a day of excitement and entertainment. Joining us to discuss the rally as well as to reflect on their major accomplishments and achievements over the years, we have the former president of NJAC, Mr. Ayegoro Ome, and we also have the political leader of NJAC, the National Joint Action Committee, that is, Mr. Kwasi Mutima. Gentlemen, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. And good morning to Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, we're very excited to talk about, as we reflect on the strides that NJAC has made over the years, where are we today as a people? Are we any better than where we began?
Well, I would say yes, we are better than where we began from that colonial period, but we still have a long way to go. I think it's very significant, very interesting that on Saturday, the country will be observing the 40th anniversary of what we call the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970. Yes. Because we tend to hear the term, a lot of times use Black Power, but I think 1970, that revolution was more than just about Black Power. It was very much about the power of love. Right? At that time, you found that within the society, our people will be able, our people develop, what prevailed was that love for country, love for each other, where as human beings, we saw each other, the humanity in each other, regardless of station. But people related to each other with that love, where we refer to each other as brother and sister. Everyone, regardless of who you were in life, you saw that other person as a brother or a sister. So that a different type of relationship developed within the society. In fact, very instructive. The statistics will show during that period of the 70s, show the lowest rate of crime within the country, particularly crime against the person. And that is because of the values and the principles that everyone shared at that time and how people relate to each other. There was that love for self, not in terms of selfishness, but self-pride. People develop a self-pride, right? So that everyone cared about the other as human beings. And I think that is one of the most significant things that occurred during that period of the 70s, and which carried our nation to a state of being a very exemplary nation to the rest of the Caribbean.
I am happy that you brought that up. Because at the moment, Mr. Ome, we have a situation in this country and throughout the world, people don't really have much regard for other people's lives. Murders are taking place on a daily basis. Have we lost our way from where we were, as you mentioned?
Well, there's been certainly been a deterioration in terms of relationships between people. But you see, in analyzing the period of the last 48 years, incidentally, next year is the 50th anniversary of the founding of NJAC. Okay. NJAC was founded in '69. The following year is the 50th anniversary of 1970. We have to look at balancing the situation. On one level, we have had very serious deteriorations, as I mentioned, in terms of living in this country. But on the other hand, 1970 provided an opportunity for people to see some hope as to what was possible. And one of the things that I've been looking at for quite a while now is that a number of people, in fact more and more people, are stating their linkages with 1970 and speaking with a certain degree of pride of what they had accomplished since then. I think the best example so far is the current Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley. He was a member of NJAC. He admitted to this just before the last election. He said that the reason that he was not with NJAC subsequently had to do with his father thinking that he would get into trouble and shipping him out of the country. But a lot of people have had their foundation in 1970 in terms of political life, in terms of social life. We have had a host of artists who have been inspired by the period of 1970. One of the most two important people are David Rudder and, significantly enough, Ras Shorty I. Ras Shorty I created soca, which was a blend of African and East Indian rhythm in the 70s, somewhere around 73. And it certainly was inspired by what was taking place at that time. The other thing you have to look at is how the different political parties, and they are a good example of how they are made up. They all try to have some sort of ethnic balance. Prior to 1970, you did have a sharp ethnic division. You had a DLP and you had a PNM. So the moral considerations coming out of 70 still exist. What has happened, unfortunately, there are some people who sought to dismantle that, and we have had a situation where, with the increase of criminality and so on, we have had really very serious problems. However, you need to look at what Brother Kwasi just said.
Yes.
In 1970 and in the years following, there were very low levels of crime in this country. And why was that so? The National Joint Action Committee generated a sense of a relationship between people, brothers and sisters. In fact, when I was in prison in 1970, there were convicts among us who had been previously called Bajans. They were very violent people. But they had come into the movement because there was a sense that, things would change. And in many instances, they became the protectors of us, the quote-unquote leaders of the National Joint Action Committee. And I remember very well how they guided us through the prison system when we were down at Nelson Island and at the Royal Jail.
Wow. What are your thoughts on that?
I think what comes out there to me very strongly is that one of the greatest achievements of 70, based on what Brother Ome has said, would have been the transformation of lives. Right? And when you examine the period, you see where that is very distinct. As Brother Ome said, you had people who had previously a life of violence and so on, and coming into contact with the movement based on the teachings, the examples that were shown by the leaders of the revolution, because I think that is most important. The examples that were shown by leaders, the sense of sacrifice, because they saw here there were leaders who were not just speaking and mouthing certain rhetoric, but they were leaders who were prepared to live certain values that they were espousing. Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that we lack within, not only our society today, but you look throughout the world, right? And this is one of the things that we are lacking, where leaders on the platform say one thing, but when you look at their lives that they lived, it's different. In 70, it was different. And what that did was to motivate people to come along with the movement, right? And their lives were transformed, where they saw now themselves, not just as people, individuals, just existing within a society to survive, but they saw their life having a new purpose, right? In terms of what they could have done to help their community, what they could have done to help their country. And I think this is one of the most significant things about the movement and what it was able to do for the society.
I'm happy you brought up leadership. Servant leadership is something that you all would have highlighted recently. You all mentioned that it's a critical factor in transforming our political and social cultures. Can you elaborate on this? And is it something that is also lacking?
Yes, I think that question of servant leadership, I think, is a very important and necessary ingredient in national development, both at the organizational level and also at the national level. And I think that when you look at the state of our nation today, I think that is one of the areas that there's so much shortcoming. Because leaders need to recognize that, as I stated earlier, that your life must exemplify, right, the values that you are espousing. It is not enough to just tell people or tell the country that you must be this, this must be, this must be. And leaders have to recognize that your role there is not just to exercise power on a population organization. Your role, right, is to serve. There's a difference. Sometimes the line gets so blurred, but there's a difference between authority and leadership. And too many times, a lot of our leaders get caught up with the authority, with the position, where you have to exercise then certain elements of power. However, the question of leadership, right, is what important, where you now would be able to motivate people in order to go beyond that extra mile, to serve their country, be patriots for their country, and so on. And that motivation by moral persuasion has more power than I instructing you to do this and instructing you to do that based on the position that I hold. And that is why we have this difficulty within our country today. So many communities, you see protests after protests after protests, because people within themselves are feeling, look, I do not feel a sense of oneness with you as a leader. They see you being up there and I down here. So it is them against us. They do not see it as a situation where all of us are in this together to try to make this work. And because of that, that sense of division develops. And therefore, you find it gives way to all this feeling of animosity, of anxiety, of stress, of anger. And therefore, everything that you feel, if I want to get this done, I have to protest. I have to protest. A protest here, a protest there. And everything breaks down. You look at our institutions, and that have led to an institutional breakdown within our society. Almost every institution you look at, there's total breakdown. And that is because of that absence of servant leadership, developing a different type of relationship with the people who we are supposed to serve within these institutions.
Well
may I add something to that, please? Because it's interesting that you raise the question of servant leadership. Our late leader, Makanda Daga, we had bestowed on him the title of chief servant. Actually, that title had been used before by Tuwali Rayabas Butler. But within the last year or so, there are two developments that I took particular note of, and I wrote them in an article. One is that Mr. Robert Bermudez, who is the current Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, in his inaugural address, made the statement that he wanted to be the chief servant of the University of the West Indies. And he took example from Makanda Daga. He said, that rebel, who he greatly admired. But when Paula May Weeks, in her inaugural address as president, she made the statement that she is the first servant of the country. And I said, but this is very interesting, because here you have two very prominent people using the concept of servant leadership. Good? And put it into the inaugural address, which means to say, this is how I want to start my term of office. Now, one of the things that I've looked at over the years, the term minister, or to minister to, actually means to be a servant of. A minister, in the strict meaning of the term, is a servant. And therefore, all who are ministers are servants. They're not our bosses. Far more that we voted for them and we pay their salaries. They're not our bosses. So I'm going back to those two examples. Her Excellency Paula May Weeks and Mr. Robert Bermudez both consider themselves to be servants.
That's an excellent point. Thank you so much for raising that. Before I just said we have 2 minutes, unfortunately. But I'd like to also touch on the film, Black Panther. We've recently witnessed an overwhelming response. I'd like to get your thoughts very quickly on that.
The thing about Black Panther, I think that people need to be somewhat clear. A lot of people approached it as though it is something bringing some new sense of consciousness to people. But I think instead what happened, Black Panther, I think, was responding to a consciousness that has been there, sometimes maybe existing in a very latent form. And so that is how we saw then people, an expression coming from people of a consciousness that may just have been there, lying maybe in a latent way in many people. Right? But it was not the film, I think, bringing some new consciousness in a way. I think it's the other way around.
Great. Now, the People's Rally, when will it be held? Just remind us, and where and what is on the agenda?
Yeah, it's on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 4:30 p.m. at Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union Hall. I think that it will be very interesting. The public is invited, one and all, regardless of political persuasion, religion, political belief, what have you. Because this is for the country. The revolution is for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not just NJAC. So therefore, everyone is invited. On that day, you will be fortunate enough to hear from those who would have lived through those experiences. For example, Brother Omi here, who was a political detainee at that time. He will be speaking. Mrs. Liseli Dagger, the wife of the late chief servant, she would also be speaking, who lived through that period, and other members as well who were not as frontline, but who experienced the period. We would also hear from artists as well, for example, Brother Valentino, who symbolized that era. People such as Organizer, other calypsonians, dancers, drummers. So it'll be an evening, we'll have literature on display, art and craft. So it'll be an evening of togetherness, where we can all come together to reflect, to relive that period, that glorious period of the 70s, a period of revolution, a period of renaissance, a period of revival, that period, so that we could learn from the lessons and values that dominated that period, so that we'll be able to guide us today in making our nation a better Trinidad and Tobago.
We certainly look forward to it. Mr. Omi, your closing comments?
Well, one thing I would like to say is that the April the 21st was a signal event in the country. Africans and Indians were supposed to have marched into Port of Spain on that date. The Eric Williams government panicked, declared the state of emergency. But in terms of establishing a concept of African-Indian unity, which was right through the demonstrations, April the 21st, 1970 would have been the focal point. And we have to use that date as a remembrance of the possibilities that exist for unity between the Africans and Indians, the two majority ethnic groups in the country, and by implication, for real national unity.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's a pleasure having you on board. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us this morning. Well, local weather is up next. Stay tuned.